Gaza sends hostage starvation video as provocation. Israel responds with firepower and determination. On August 1st, 2025, Gaza crossed a line no country could ignore. After rejecting peace terms and broadcasting a horrifying video of two emaciated Israeli hostages, Hamas militants hijacked a humanitarian aid convoy, executed the drivers, and burned a soldier alive. What happened next was unprecedented. Israel launched the largest coordinated drone operation in the history of the Middle East. 85 reconnaissance drones, 160 attack drones, and 980 elite commandos quietly advanced on Gaza. Within hours, the war was on. Everything was going according to plan. But everything almost fell apart when a Hamas guard spotted the rescue team. A single shot could have caused disaster. Can Israeli infantry rescue the hostages alive? And how can drones and new microweapons turn a rescue mission into a war of total annihilation? Join me as I explore the truth behind the war. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m. on August 1st, 2025, high-stakes ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas collapsed behind closed doors in Cairo. Israel had issued a final demand: release all 50 Israeli hostages alive and end the war immediately. For weeks, diplomats had worked frantically to avoid a full-scale invasion. But what happened next shattered every remaining trace of restraint. Instead of a response, Hamas sent a video. Two hostages, emaciated, barely breathing, chained to the floor of a windowless room. Their ribs were visible, their eyes sunken. One collapsed mid-sentence. This was no longer political, it was psychological warfare. Just hours later, another provocation. 3 humanitarian aid trucks carrying food and medical supplies were ambushed at the Gaza entry point. The drivers were executed, the contents stolen. One Israeli soldier escorting the convoy was burned alive inside his vehicle, footage of which was later circulated on Telegram by Gaza extremists. The Israeli government convened an emergency session. One official described the situation bluntly: "We are no longer negotiating with a government, we are confronting barbarism." By midnight, the Prime Minister authorized a full-scale rescue and retaliation mission. This was not just about hostages anymore. It was about restoring a red line that had been obliterated. The Mossad, Shin Bet, and IDF were given a single directive: bring them all home, and make sure Hamas never dares again. The final line had been crossed, and what was coming next would shake Gaza to its core. Before we get into the campaign, tell me where in the world you are watching from. Now let's see what Gaza is about to face. By 2:15 a.m. on August 2nd, 2025, Israel launched its most sophisticated drone operation in history, under the codename Steel Light. 85 reconnaissance UAVs silently crossed into Gaza airspace, flying just 100 feet above the ground to evade radar. Their objective: locate the hidden compound holding 50 hostages. Within 40 minutes, high-resolution thermal scans confirmed the target: a fortified basement beneath a school in Khan Yunis, shielded by multiple civilian layers. At the same time, 160 Israeli strike UAVs, armed with laser-guided bombs and AI target lock systems, zeroed in on 5 of Hamas's most vital military installations. The strikes were calculated to occur within 8 seconds of each other, designed to blind, confuse, and scatter Gaza's defense network. Meanwhile, 100 armored vehicles carried 980 elite IDF commandos toward a stealth landing zone near Rafah. These weren't ordinary troops. This was Israel's sharpest blade: Sayeret Matkal, Shayetet 13, and Egos, all trained for hostage extraction under fire. Not a single drone or vehicle was detected. No alarm was raised. Gaza slept, unaware that the largest UAV infiltration ever seen in the region was already underway above their heads. This wasn't just preparation. It was the calm before the storm. And in the silence, Israel's war machine was already inside the gates. Please like, subscribe, and join me, and let's watch Israel destroy Gaza. At exactly 03:48 a.m., the first armored personnel carrier halted in a dry irrigation ditch less than 600 meters from the target compound. The Israeli Special Forces, faces painted black, moved like shadows through the rubble of southern Khan Yunis. They had 4 minutes to breach, neutralize, extract, and disappear before the wider Hamas force could respond. Inside the underground chamber where 50 hostages were held, the air was suffocating. Most had been without food for 48 hours. Some couldn't even stand. What the rescuers found was closer to a morgue than a prison. Bodies shaking from dehydration, skin clinging to bone. But above them, time had just run out. As Unit 217 moved into breach formation, a single Hamas guard hidden behind a water tank caught a glimmer of motion in the dark. He raised his rifle. Too late. A suppressed shot dropped him silently, but the sound of his weapon clattering to the floor echoed through the hallway. An alarm was triggered. Within seconds, the stairwell erupted in gunfire. Hamas reinforcements rushed in from a nearby tunnel entrance, only to be met with flashbangs and frangible rounds. The confined space turned lethal. In just 93 seconds, 14 Hamas fighters were dead. 3 Israeli commandos were wounded, 1 seriously, but the hostages had been secured. Outside, Hamas technical vehicles armed with DSHK heavy machine guns swarmed the perimeter, but they hadn't accounted for what came next. From above, 11 loitering suicide drones, released by the IDF minutes earlier, slammed into enemy positions. One drone hit a van carrying a recoilless rifle team, turning it into a fireball. Another struck a communications post, severing Hamas command in the area. The battle lasted only 7 minutes, but by the end, over 40 Hamas fighters lay dead or wounded. The compound was reduced to rubble. Using smoke screens and decoy flares, Israeli forces exfiltrated the hostages in convoys of 3, each armored and escorted by aerial drones overhead. Every vehicle had medics on board. The weakest hostages were put on stretchers, IV lines inserted on the move. One hostage, a 16-year-old girl, had lost 22 pounds in captivity and was semi-conscious when loaded onto the armored vehicle. At 04:39 a.m., the last unit cleared the combat zone. At 04:45 a.m., the IDF encrypted beacon went live. Package secured. Phase 2 ready. The hostages were alive. The nightmare was not over, but for the first time in weeks, Israel had taken something back. Not just lives, but control. And Gaza was about to feel the full retaliation. What happens next will decide the fate of Gaza and destroy its entire chain of command. At 5 o'clock a.m., just 15 minutes after the final Israeli convoy exited Khan Yunis with the rescued hostages, Operation Phase 2 was initiated. This time, there would be no stealth, no warnings, no negotiations, only fire. From the southern skies, over 60 UAVs loaded with high-yield thermobaric warheads descended in coordinated waves. Their targets were precise: Gaza's primary command center, the central weapons depot near Jabalia, a fuel storage site in Rafah, and the Hamas combat staging ground in Deir al-Balah. Each strike hit within a 12-second window, creating a domino effect of chaos and paralysis. The main command hub, buried 30 feet underground, was obliterated by a GBU-72 thermobaric bomb dropped from a stealth drone. The blast created a subterranean fireball over 3,000 degrees, incinerating everything inside. At least 27 high-ranking Hamas operatives, including 2 known bomb makers and a senior logistics commander, were confirmed killed. Simultaneously, 14 suicide drones slammed into Hamas barracks, where nearly 200 fighters had gathered after the failed hostage defense. Over 130 were killed instantly, while the rest scattered into alleyways, only to be picked off by hovering UAVs equipped with AI facial recognition targeting systems. But the strikes didn't stop there. A fuel depot in Rafah, suspected of powering Gaza's rocket program, was struck by 3 bunker-buster drones. The resulting fireball was seen as far as Ashkelon. According to IDF thermal imaging, the temperature at the impact site exceeded 1,200 degrees Celsius. Secondary explosions continued for 19 minutes, setting fire to adjacent weapon stockpiles. Meanwhile, on the northern front, long-range precision missiles launched from naval platforms in the Mediterranean hit 5 Hamas radar facilities and signal jamming stations, silencing Gaza's eyes and ears in less than 6 minutes. The strikes were relentless. Every 42 seconds, a new drone was either striking or repositioning over another target. At one point, Over 100 different IDF drones were airborne above Gaza simultaneously, coordinated through a new quantum-encrypted battlefield AI system that jammed enemy comms while enhancing Israeli targeting accuracy by over 93%. Inside Gaza, confusion turned to panic. Without orders, without fuel, without a functioning command network, Hamas fighters tried to regroup, but their encrypted radios were now being spoofed, feeding them false coordinates and commands. Units moved in circles. Reinforcements rushed to buildings already destroyed. It was no longer war, it was dismantling. By 6 o'clock a.m., Gaza's defensive capability had collapsed in all 4 quadrants. And for the first time since the war began, Hamas leadership was off-grid, unreachable, presumed dead or in hiding. The message from Israel was now clear, and written in fire across the Gaza skyline. Touch our civilians, and your war machine burns. As the sun rose over Gaza at 6:15 a.m., the skies still glowed with smoke and embers from the inferno unleashed just hours earlier. But the airstrikes were only half the plan. Now came the ground offensive, relentless, inch by inch. From 3 separate corridors, north, east, and south, 100 Israeli armored vehicles pushed deep into the urban heart of Gaza. Each vehicle carried elite infantry teams equipped with thermal scopes, AI-guided corner-shot rifles, and drone-linked helmet displays, giving them a 270-degree field of vision through walls. The mission? Clear every structure, tunnel, and alleyway of Hamas remnants and secure the entire region. By 7 o'clock a.m., the first Israeli units reached a suspected Hamas stronghold in the Shuja'iyya district. What followed was a 47-minute firefight against heavily fortified positions. Over 70 Hamas fighters were entrenched in 3 buildings, armed with RPGs and improvised mines. But the IDF used a technique never seen before: micro-drone swarm neutralization. These palm-sized drones entered through ventilation ducts and windows, identifying enemy fighters and triggering low-yield fragmentation bursts with surgical accuracy. By the end of the hour, 68 Hamas fighters were confirmed dead, and not a single Israeli soldier had fallen in that zone. Elsewhere in the city, Israeli forces advanced using urban-clearing bulldozers protected by APCs, tearing through concrete barriers and tunnel entrances. In total, 49 tunnel shafts were discovered and destroyed using thermobaric gel explosives, which collapsed the tunnels and burned out the oxygen inside, rendering them unusable. Resistance quickly faded. With communication lines cut, Hamas fighters fled in disorganized groups, often leaving behind weapons, uniforms, and wounded comrades. Some surrendered. Others were caught by Israeli UAVs hovering silently overhead, marking them for capture or elimination. At 8:45 a.m., the final assault came in the form of a coordinated drone artillery strike on a hidden Hamas fuel cache beneath a hospital parking lot. The IDF had delayed this strike until the area was evacuated. But when the blast came, it triggered a chain of underground explosions lasting 14 minutes, incinerating thousands of gallons of fuel and neutralizing one of Hamas's last logistical lifelines. By 9:30 a.m., after just 6 hours of ground combat, the Israeli flag was raised over the former Hamas intelligence headquarters, now reduced to scorched concrete and silence. Final casualty count: Gaza, over 430 Hamas fighters killed, dozens of facilities destroyed, and all 50 hostages rescued alive. Israel, 2 soldiers killed, 12 lightly wounded. An astounding figure given the scale of the operation. The message was now irreversible. No inch of ground taken from Israel would be left unchallenged, and no act of brutality would go unanswered. Gaza had fallen, but more than that, it had been dismantled with mathematical precision. Beyond the fire and precision, this operation leaves behind a brutal truth. When humanity is abandoned, only devastation remains. The hostage crisis in Gaza wasn't just a military failure. It was a moral collapse. Starving civilians, weaponizing aid, and turning innocent lives into leverage reveals how far a society can fall when hatred overtakes compassion. But Israel's response also teaches another lesson: that strength, when rooted in justice and discipline, can protect life instead of destroy it. The restraint shown in delaying certain strikes, the surgical focus on military targets, and the preservation of civilian lives remind us that warfare, even at its most violent, must still obey the boundaries of conscience. In the end, this was not just a victory of firepower. It was a warning to the world. Peace is fragile, and when broken, rebuilding it demands not just force, but wisdom. In just over 6 hours, Israel executed one of the most complex military rescue and retaliation operations in modern warfare. Over 430 enemy combatants eliminated, 50 hostages brought home alive, and Hamas's infrastructure shattered into dust. But beyond the numbers lies something deeper, a message written not in press releases, but in action. This wasn't just about rescuing citizens. It was about redrawing the lines of deterrence. It was about sending a clear signal. No crime against the innocent will go unanswered. No hostage will be forgotten. And no act of terror will be tolerated in silence. Yet for all its military brilliance, the operation carries a haunting echo. Every destroyed tunnel, every collapsed command post, every shattered wall reminds us of what happens when diplomacy fails and brutality is embraced. The Middle East has long known war, but it must now remember why peace matters more. Israel's strike was not just vengeance. It was control, precision, and restraint wrapped in overwhelming force. And for Gaza, it was a reckoning. But for the world watching, it was a lesson. Strength without justice is tyranny. But justice without strength is surrender. As the smoke clears and the region recalibrates, one truth remains. The cost of crossing the final line is never measured in headlines. It is measured in fire, blood, and silence. If you value truth, strategy, and untold stories from the battlefield, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video. Your support keeps these stories alive.